Good morning. Hi, I'm Kelly Ferguson.
And I'm Aaron Howard.
Thank you for joining us this morning. I see folks are logging on, so we will get started in just 1 minute. In the meantime, Aaron and I are in Gig Harbor, Washington, for any of you who are familiar with that area. It is outside of the capital of Olympia, not too far from Tacoma and Seattle, Tacoma Airport. Little bit cloudy here today, not too bad, but it's kind of a typical May day where you get a mixed bag of everything. How are things in your neck of Gig Harbor, Aaron?
Actually pretty good, although last night we had one of those windstorms that took out power. It's really weird. It's like,
Really?
what happened to spring? We didn't get no spring yet.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
Huh, that's funny. Well, I'm going to go ahead and we'll start here. People will continue logging on, but the session is being recorded, just so you know. In addition, you can submit questions to us, which, assuming time allows for some at the end, which we'll endeavor to do. You can submit those questions along the way and we'll address them at the end. So again, I'm Kelly Ferguson. I am one of the co-founders of Mass Ingenuity along with Aaron Howard, and I am the Chief Marketing Officer for the company, specializing in government relations. My background is in organization development. I'm kind of a utility, all-around generalist OD professional, and founded the company in 2010 with Aaron, who I will introduce to you in just a few minutes. Let me give you a preview of our session today, which is focused on enterprise performance management. As you know, in particular, we're going to talk about, I'm going to do a little preview of the learning objectives here and what the agenda is. And then we will move forward with talking about, in particular today, the fundamentals map. And I'll explain, of course, what that is all along the way. So we'll do a very brief little tiny bit about Mass Ingenuity, just so you have a little more background. Aaron will talk about, I'll introduce Aaron, and then he'll talk about some of the challenges that we know are facing state government leaders and team members, having worked with state government for, 15 years now. We're pretty familiar with the wide array of challenges. We'll go into a discussion of enterprise performance management, EPM, how it enables agencies to accomplish more about with regards to transforming citizens' lives and fulfilling the agency's mission. Today, we're going to focus on the fundamentals map, which is a tool we use as part of our APM suite of components, specifically for operational excellence and that day-to-day, all of that routine work that needs to be accomplished. We'll very briefly talk about the process of building a fundamentals map, the timeline, what it looks like, and then what are some of the outcomes and benefits. And we'll do that outcomes and benefits piece by talking about 3 specific clients, show you their fundamentals map, and talk about what solution and outcomes they were addressing in that work. The appendix, we're not going to go through it today, but we will be sending out this deck to you, and we will have in the appendix several sample dashboards, storyboards, and reports, all of which are part of our results software data. We're not going to talk about results software today, but I did want you to see here on this overview of our operational and strategic excellence modules. Today being the one focused on fundamentals. Later in the summer and the fall, you'll see we'll talk about results software as well as strategic initiatives, business reviews, which are the monthly and quarterly reviews where people get together, look at the data, look at their initiatives and their fundamentals and see how they're doing, and identify some process improvement work. And of course, we will always talk about change management, which really falls through all of these components, as you know. A tiny bit about Mass Ingenuity. We, again, founded in 2010. We're experts in the SaaS software space, as well as professional organizational development and EPM services. We've worked with clients in Arizona, California, New Mexico, Oregon, Pennsylvania, and Washington. Though we've partnered with about 85 agencies in our company's history, all specializing in state government. We're all about integrating people, process, and technology. That's our mantra and our mission. And with that, I'm going to introduce Aaron Howard, and he will talk a little bit about some challenges that we know state governments are facing. Aaron's been my business partner since 2010, and we met here in Seattle when he was very busy running a company called Ravenfire, and that's where I met him. Excuse me. He is a graduate of the University of Washington. He's a double E in computer science. He's also one of those kind of eclectic guys where he also has been a professional musician specializing in wind instruments. He also was a pilot and even taught flying lessons. But he was also part of the very almost heady and exciting days back when Seattle was at the forefront of launching desktop publishing and digital media to the world. So pretty eclectic background and a great business partner. We're glad to have him as our president and CTO. So with that, Aaron, you want to take it away, please?
Great. Thank you, Kelly. And I think that what you've managed to tell everybody is that I had one heck of a time deciding what I wanted to be.
Yes, probably from a very young age.
Indeed, indeed. But you know what? Sometimes the best things come from having a plan that is flexible.
Yep.
And speaking of flexible, I don't think there's any group on the planet that has to be more flexible than the people that work in state agencies today.
Yep, true.
This particular visual is meant to just outline some of the challenges that we all face, and especially those who are employees in state agencies. And as you scan through the list, you're bound to see some things that you go, yeah. For example, you might say, yeah, budget, that's always a problem. Or you might say, I just can't keep up with what the governor's office wants. In any case, you'll see lots of things that probably look familiar. What I'd like to do is just briefly talk about the large high-level issues that we all face today. I think it's safe to say that the services that citizens need, and in some cases desperately need, child welfare as an example, are coming from state agencies. Yes, local provides lots of support as well. The state agencies are at the tip of the spear, and yet they are faced with challenges of budget, of policy being smeared together with politics. I don't mean that pejorative, I'm just saying it happens, but it does make it more difficult to manage. Right. Some of the other macro issues that we face are in this area of social conditions. And without getting into any of that, we all know by just reading any news that it's a challenging time to be performing the value of providing services. So in any case, the challenges are numerous, and what we're going to do today is we're going to just talk a little bit about how those challenges can be addressed by EPM, and specifically today, our fundamentals. The next slide actually helps us look at the challenge through a slightly different lens. If we're all faced with problems every day, then the question becomes, so what might be some of the pivot points that will allow us to move forward? And one of them is data. Now, we're inundated with data everywhere. I'm confident that everybody with a smartphone is looking at it from time to time going, hey, more data to consume. I'm specifically talking about the data that we collect in our organizations that have to do with how we're performing. We'll, of course, talk about that later in terms of outcome and process measures, but needless to say, data is how we want to make decisions going forward in general. This diagram, this data maturity model, basically is a way of looking at 4 basic steps of data maturity, from instinct to optimized. And when we ask our customers to self-assess themselves, they're usually pretty harsh, harsher than we actually think they should be, and they'll put themselves in the lower left or maybe in the yellow. In any case, it's their recognition that learning to use data is something that is an imperative and that they have to work harder on. Well, there's lots of ways to do that, and none of them are theoretical. Enterprise performance management, the use of fundamentals and measures, brings it into life. In other words, instead of being theory, it's practice, and practice actually makes us better at it. And what are we doing? We're just trying to be able to make good decisions based on data to where we put our problem-solving resources in order to enhance the services we provide. So data maturity is not a theoretical concept. It is something that affects all of us. Well, Kelly, I know you're going to guide us forward, so back to you for a moment.
Okay, thanks. Let's have you, Aaron, briefly describe exactly what we mean by enterprise performance management.
Okay, great. Thank you. Well, I'm going to go right back to the content that you had on the earlier slide. And we're going to talk about the components of enterprise performance management. Now, that's not the same as talking about the why we do it. It's not the same as talking about, some of the ways in which we develop the pieces. We will do that later. This is really just looking at it from a high level and saying, so what is this thing called enterprise performance management, or EPM for short? And it can be easily viewed as the following. The fundamentals, which is really a process view of how we do our work. Results software, which is our solution to the problem of how you gather all of that and create the reports. Strategic initiatives, where we invest those precious dollars that we get to build capability and capacity. Well, we want to make sure that those are healthy and that they actually come to fruition. So strategic initiatives are part of EPM. Business reviews are the core of it. If measures of the currency that drives it, well, you got to cash that currency in somewhere. Not the best metaphor, but it came to me. And where you cash it in is at a business review, because that's where you sit down and have a conversation, not about, okay, let's interrogate how we're doing, but rather, how are we doing and where should we invest in problem solving? Which of course leads to problem solving and in general process improvement. And all of our customers have got some kind of continuous process improvement happening, CPI. But what we like to do is pull it together into a system that makes it easy for every single person, not just an expert, every single person to problem solve. And of course, the entire process has to be laced together with change management, as you pointed out, on a continuous basis. So those are the components that make up enterprise performance management. So it's a particular lens, and it's a lens that makes it easy to sort of subdivide and talk about. If we go to the next slide, it's another view. And this particular view lifts up and says, well, if we had to draw a picture, what might that picture look like for EPM? And this is a handy one because it has sort of an inherent feel of movement from left to right. Now, that's a little bit arbitrary, but bear with me while I explain it. If we start with fundamentals on the left, that's the process orientation. If we then move to strategic initiatives, that's the integration of those very important projects into completion and becoming part of fundamentals. The business reviews, as I just said, are where we basically check everything, and problem solving is, of course, how we go about fixing. Well, if we pause for a moment and say, that sounds like a Deming cycle, meaning plan, do, check, adjust. You know, that plan, do, check, adjust is a heartbeat of every organization. It can be formal and it can be informal, but it exists because we naturally, as humans, go plan, do, check, adjust. That's what an EPM system does, is it rotates through that. And the reason why it's so important to do that is that it allows the system to focus on the customer at all, absolutely continually. What did we say we would do? How can we improve our services? But you know, if we focus on the customers and we have a system, we're not done. Because our workforce is the only way it gets done, and that's the employee-driven concept, a highly engaged employee workforce. And when we combine those elements, we get a plan, do, check, pulse. It's kind of like our heart rate, just constantly going. We use data to decide what we're doing. Yes, we have to have a system, in this case, results software, to pull it all together and make it easy to see everything. But ultimately, what we now have is a system that is living and breathing every day, performing performance management. And today we're going to talk about the fundamentals. So Kelly, guide us further now.
Yep, please describe for us, Aaron, the specific components of the fundamentals map, and not just what they are, but why they're important.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask you to join me on this one. So just a heads up, I like it when we do this when we're talking to new customers as well as existing customers. It's fun because it's a way of making something that seems a little complicated very simple. So I'm going to do the theory part of this, and then I'd like you to add the color commentary, the people side of it, and then later on we're going to show people examples of this. So
Yes.
the fundamentals map can be looked at from a topological point of view in this diagram. By the way, this is a diagram that we actually have our customers use to explain. 2 days ago, I witnessed a sponsor, actually a CIO, a sponsor explain to an entire leadership team what fundamentals was by using this picture. And it was just amazing because it was a combination of theory and practice. So the theory is this: we start with our mission, vision, values, and we make sure that we're clear. Generally speaking, we are. Now we establish key goals. Those are the long-term enduring goals that if we in fact achieve, they instantiate or prove our mission. Now, in order to do that, we have to measure something. So we have outcome measures, and we use the outcome measures, assigned outcome owners, that in fact allow us to check our work. Are our key goals working? If we have a key goal around, employee engagement, are we doing it or not? Our core processes are what really helps bring this to life, because the core processes says, what do we do every day to deliver value? Think of it as a giant work stream that could be then, of course, cascaded. And if we're going to have a giant work stream, we have to absolutely measure that with process measures and process owners to keep track. So this is the essence of, if you think people, process, and technology, this is the essence of the process piece for doing the daily work. And Kelly, I'd like you to add a little bit of color around this, and please connect the dots to the people.
Sure. First, I'll just say, by elaborating on every outcome measure, which is reflective of a key goal, as Aaron said, and every process measure, which is reflective of a specific core process, there are targets for where an organization would like to be, as well as, of course, the red, yellow, green thresholds that relate to where are they relative to that target. And so that's where the performance measures come in for the fundamentals. Having an owner is incredibly important, and those owners are the ones who then go forth with their team to a business review, because they've been monitoring their measures, whether it's an outcome or a process measure, on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. And that's why the monthly and the quarterly business reviews are so very, very important. Basically, in essence, what we're doing is we're shedding light on and breaking down silos, because so many people only really realize or understand, and maybe not even 100% understand, their particular core process and how it relates to a key goal of the organization. So it's about really opening up the viewfinders, bringing down the silos, and getting people to cross-pollinate and talk to each other, because these processes are all interrelated and connected. Just like a human body, everything is interrelated and connected. So that's why this is such an important tool. And it's a living document. It's not fixed, and it doesn't go on the shelf. It's we have clients who print it out on big tabloid or even poster board size and have it hanging in every conference room. So it just has a lot of value. And then plus, I'm always very excited when state agencies are using it to onboard new employees, because it accelerates their understanding of the agency exponentially, not just their particular little function. So that
Great. Thank
yeah,
you. I know you're going to guide us forward on the next part, so go ahead and just give us a pointer, and we'll continue on in this story.
You bet. So the next thing I'd love to have you talk about, Aaron, of course, is how is the process? And this is just a real quick acknowledgement of, so what does it take to develop and implement a fundamentals map?
Yeah, thank you. Well, the folks in the audience, and for that matter, all of our customers, what they want to know is why we should do it. And so we put a lot of effort into the why, which we've been talking about. When it comes to the how to do it, the most important question they ask is, can we get some value quickly? Can we have a fast win? And the answer is yes. We can have a fast win and a long-term sustained value. Now, what does that mean? I'll come back to the short term in a moment. You mentioned that it's great seeing fundamental maps hanging up and being used for onboarding. I'm still amazed and delighted when we see customers from 2010, 11, and 12 that have their fundamentals mapped up on walls, and they still use them to this day. That means that they've gone through multiple leaders, multiple governor changes, and yet the system lives on. That's an important message that we want to deliver to everybody, is that you're not just doing this to get a quick win, and then, oh, darn, we be here, you be gone sets in, and it all goes away.
Right.
It's long-term. However, it is important to get results quick. Now, the numbers that I'm showing here have been achieved, and it just really depends on schedules. But for example, the design and development phase can be done in 90 days. We've even had one example that was shorter, but let's just say 90 days. And that might take a little longer if there's scheduling problems, but that's still not very long. And what happens? Well, first of all, we get the sponsors' engagement and activity clarified right up front. We pull together a design team, and we pull together, by the way, a project team. And we build change management in from the get-go so that we don't stumble upon ourselves trying to answer the question over and over again to employees, what are we doing? We should be really clear up front. We build the case for change. Well, believe it or not, that can be done in 90 days. And that means that at the end of 90 days, it's time to think about that first business review. That first business review can come up as soon as 30 days later. Now, how can that be possible? Well, it's because it's an agile system. It's not a waterfall. We're not boiling the ocean, trying to get everything right. That's just crazy. It's very agile. So that first business review is a prototype. It's internal. Not very many guests are even invited, but it gives a chance to put into practice what we've learned about process, people, and technology in a real setting with a real fundamentals map that is then validated and improved over time. And then it initiates the cadence of either monthly or quarterly reviews. So that's how the whole thing, sorry, sounds like a song, but that's how the whole thing gets started. And it really is marvelous to see that value happen so quickly. Well, with all this theory, I need to show the next slide.
Yeah, we're going to show some specific client fundamentals maps. And Aaron, if you would also, when you talk about the circumstance and the situation that the specific client was facing, also let's think about in today's world how state budget cuts, which are quite dramatic right now, are being impacted. How does the fundamentals map in this process help in those circumstances?
Yeah, you bet. I'll give a specific example of that in just a moment. So thank you. So we're looking at an actual fundamentals map. Now, for those of you in the audience, there's no chance of being able to read all that. So I just want to draw your attention to sort of how the theoretical model becomes reality. This map is literally the process view of the entire organization on a page. When the organization is relatively small, there's typically one map. When it's relatively large, and a good example would be human services, they're typically large, or corrections, then the map is cascaded, and it can cascade in many different ways. For example, it can cascade by program. That means in human services, it could be child welfare, aging. In corrections, it could be education. It could be medical. And then on the supporting side, it can cascade into specific maps for HR or IT or finance. So in other words, it's a really logical way to be able to go from top to bottom, but it starts with this top level view. And if you could read it, you would notice the following. On the far left are callouts, and believe it or not, those callouts are identical to the topology, the schematic that we showed you earlier, starting with the foundational elements of vision, mission, value at the top, moving down through key goals, outcomes, outcome measures, processes. Now, there's sub-processes here. We didn't talk about that, and time permitting, we can go into that. And then, of course, owners and measures. So this is an example of exactly how a map then gets unfolded, if you will. And the value of it is we find leaders taking this map they take it to Ways and Means to explain what they do when they're asking for money, or possibly dealing with a legislator who doesn't think they should have the money that they asked for. almost always being able to say what they do is a difficult challenge, but this map makes it easy to say, you know what, let me just take you through the processes. We start on the left and we move to the right, and pretty soon people go, yeah, I see what you do. It has worked. People have significantly improved their budget intake, especially in these days, by just simply being absolutely clear. Here's how we're going to spend your money, and oh, by the way, here's the outcome measures that we will share with you to ensure that you know that we actually did it. And that's exactly what's happening, Kelly, is people are sharing, agencies are sharing their measures with the ledge, with the executive branch in an open fashion. Of course, they're also reporting their normal KPIs and OKRs and all the stuff they have to do, but they're doing it now in a much clearer manner. Yeah. Shall I just roll forward into the next section, or do you want to set it
up? Yes. Do you want to talk about this, and then we can talk about New Mexico Health?
Absolutely, that's very good. So in particular, this is an example, happens to be Washington Department Division of Vocational Rehab, DVR. And what I love about this example is just how driven they were to want to make a change. The case for change that they wrote essentially said, we want to become a data-driven and learning organization. And we have lots of data, so we want to use that data. And as you can see, when they took a look at some of the top factors that were driving performance, it boiled down to the need for information and feedback and resources and tools to deal with it. So of course, we decided that we would suggest a fundamentals map and measures in the software to track it, and business reviews. And by golly, that's exactly what they did. And where they are now is that they are highly disciplined monthly business reviews. And in those monthly business reviews, which have a regular cadence mapped out for a year, they're measuring, discussing, and having open dialogue around where to put their problem-solving focus, where to put their energy to be able to improve in the long term. They also deal with some of the short-term problems that every agency has, whether it be budget or reporting, or in their case, they have to report to the Fed, and that's a lot of work. And so they're always talking about that. In other words, they've got a real EPM system with a heartbeat, plan, do, check, adjust running.
Sweet. Thank you, Aaron. And a few words on our next client example, which is the New Mexico Department of Health. This is their fundamentals map, and just a few quick two words about this. This is a client who was a director in the state of Oregon and worked with us twice before becoming the secretary of New Mexico Health. And so great to have another repeat client. In addition, their first business review was, I think it was about 3 weeks ago, and they had over 100 employees attend, which is pretty spectacular. So,
yeah, it's hard to beat that particular factoid because it's an extraordinary event.
Yeah.
We have the fundamentals map up. This is their preliminary map. They're definitely a work in progress, but what an amazing work in progress. We don't normally, by the way, do shout outs to ourselves because that would be sort of rude, but I have to take a moment and do a shout out to our consulting team who have become part of them. They're partners, quite literally, and it's absolutely amazing what that partnership has done. So shout out to some people who are doing some great stuff. The map itself actually looks very similar to the other ones. So the topology is the same. And what's exciting for us is that, number one, to have a leader be a third-time customer, it really speaks more about what happens in their world than ours, because we're just there to serve. We're there to serve by giving them the methods and the tools and the technology. But what's spectacular is that it's been proven in 3 different agencies now that the same concept works. And of course, imagine the learning that went into this. I know that the secretary wouldn't mind us saying that over this period of several years, the awareness around sponsorship, the awareness around change management, just simply the awareness of how to run these monster organizations has increased dramatically and made both the secretary and his team very, very powerful. But powerful in the sense of delivering value to the citizens, first of Oregon and now of New Mexico, who absolutely need those services. You can go to the next slide, please. That's just a few things, but Kelly's covered most of this. What I want to highlight is that one, they're using fundamentals. So by now, I'm hoping that the story we've unfolded is that fundamentals becomes fundamental to EPM, and that of course when you're doing fundamentals, you're not just making a picture. No. You're also defining processes that have to then be documented in the software, and measures that have to be in the software, and establishing business reviews and setting yourself up for problem solving. So there's a lot of work that's summarized in a simple picture. And I do want to emphasize that lots of folks have tried to do continuous process improvement over many, many years, and have often wondered, how come it didn't stick? And it wasn't for lack of effort, and it wasn't because of the people. It was because the actual tools, methods, approach didn't guarantee the ability to communicate on a regular, repetitive basis that could be understood by people who don't do the work. Legislators, executives, boards, commissions, citizens. So that's a powerful game. Let's move on, please.
Yeah. Last client we're going to talk about today is Washington Department of Retirement Systems.
Yes, indeed. This is a particularly exciting story because of two things. One is these folks have been doing this work in EPM for slightly over a decade, a long time. And they have continued to evolve and change with the times, because obviously what they do does change. Although there's a part about retirement systems that is also steady, right? You just want to be really good at it constantly. So for example, in the state of Washington, when you're managing PERS 1 and 2, you just have to be really good at it. They are very good at it, and they took the time when they first built this to not only build it out correctly, but also to add a little bit of brand to it. This is the first one I think I'm showing that's kind of cool looking in real life. Yeah. And the reason they did that was sometimes it's hard to get the attention of folks when you're talking about retirement systems, because they don't normally have a whole lot of problems. What they have is a need to be steady. And so if you don't have a lot of problems, sometimes it's kind of hard to get attention when you're talking to folks who are your colleagues, other agencies, etc. But what they did was master the act of being able to turn the change into a communications weapon, not to mention that they are running their organization tight as a ship. Yeah. Kelly, I know you want to say something about this organization.
Thank you. Well, it was an exciting client, and they were really trailblazers in this work, and quite a great pleasure. And they have, of course, evolved over the years, and their fundamentals map is a living document, which is cool. Well, Aaron, always a pleasure to present with you. Shall we shift gears and go to some questions?
I think so. Our last slide really we already talked about. We've covered the why they did it and the completeness of it. So I think we should go directly to the questions. Let's see what's out there.
Kelly and Aaron, thank you both. We do have 3 questions that have come through. The first 2 I'm going to combine because they're quite related. And by the way, for folks who are out there on the line, there is still time to get questions in. So please do so if you have any. So again, first question combined from 2. Aaron and Kelly, how does a fundamentals map relate to strategic planning? And can a fundamentals map be used during the strategic planning process?
Great question. So Kelly, do you want to kick it off or do you want me?
I'm going to let you kick that one off.
Well, the strategic planning side of this it's fascinating to me. The short answer, just to begin with the end in mind, is that fundamentals is very intimately related to strategic planning because, number one, it has the appearance of being actually a strategic plan on our page as defined by our own customers. And number 2 is, if you're going to have a view of your organization that's process centric, then by definition, you have the ability to figure out how to integrate your strategic initiatives. So as an example, if you're in human services and you have a strategic initiative for one of your programs, maybe it's self-sufficiency, then you really have to know, how am I going to take the new initiative and get it rolled in and measure it? Well, if without fundamentals, it could be a bit of a random walk. It's inevitable. With fundamentals, you look at your process, you look at your sub-processes, and you say, where does it fit, and what new measures should I introduce to accommodate tracking of it or not? And we've seen this happen over and over again, so it's a very, very tight fit.
Right.
But I want to go back to the first comment I made. Honestly, I never anticipated, this was years ago, that folks would say, well, thank you for my plan on a page, my strategic plan on a page. I wouldn't have guessed that one. But you know what? That's why customers are so important. They'll tell you exactly what they're going to do. And the reason that happened was that, among many, is that the fundamentals were used by our early customers to literally help explain to the ledge what they did. And when they got done with it, people, legislators, and also boards and commissions would say, well, you know what? Looks to me like you put a strategy together. So the relationship turns out to be, basically anecdotal, specific, and I guess ultimately, and maybe Kelly, you talk about this, it's really about the concept of taking strategy and taking it all the way to execution. And if that's the case, they two must come together.
Right. Well, you said it really well with that, especially that last comment. A strategic plan is designed to either improve an existing capability within the agency or add in a brand new capability. And that eventually has to be operationalized. Therefore, you're right. Eventually, a strategic initiative needs to be integrated into the daily routine work. So, okay, next question, please.
Yes, we are a large agency with many divisions. Would we create one fundamentals map for the whole agency or a separate fundamentals map for each of our divisions?
Great question. So once again, Kelly, would you like to kick it off, or do you want to back clean?
I like doing back clean.
No problem. So the answer is it depends, and I'll give you use cases to back that up. If it turns out the organization is very homogeneous in terms of what it does, it sort of delivers one thing no matter what its size, then one large map that is then cascaded in terms of measures, I'll come back to that, is sufficient. But what we've found is quite the opposite. A lot of organizations really have to cascade their maps based upon programs. And sometimes when they're really large, to cascade them based upon the supporting processes. Now, we didn't go into that detail, but just a real quick aside, you probably noticed on the maps that there was a left and a right-hand side for the core processes. They were sometimes light gray and dark gray. And that's because the operating processes are those core things you do that have to be done to serve the customer. If, for example, determining eligibility, that would be a classic one. On the other side, though, the supporting side are the things that without you cannot run with. That sounded a little bit like Yoda, but you know all what I meant. You have to have IT, you have to have HR, or you just can't function. So those are the supporting processes. Well, in any case, in cascading, which is the act of basically saying I need more than one map, you can then focus on the programs, and you can also focus on the shared or central services that are being used as a supporting mechanism for the entire agency. And so it really is, the answer is, yeah, do both. And decide what you need to do based upon the actual need as defined by what the customer gets.
Right.
What we found is that the program maps are extremely important. And then a map that covers most of the supporting processes is also often very important. So it's very flexible. Kelly, do you want to talk a little bit about, and sometimes people start at a program level as opposed to the top level, even though we prescribe starting at the top.
Yes, and the reason that will sometimes occurs is the energy may be there with one particular program leadership team. they're just ready, or they have a mandate, or they have talked to somebody else from another agency with a similar program. Maybe it's in a different state, and they've realized that the work that we've done with them has been really helpful and instrumental. So it is situational, and we're very flexible is kind of the bottom line. Aaron, I'm going to kick something back to you and say, we haven't talked much about risk management or the function of risk management and agency governance. Can you speak just a little bit briefly about that?
Yeah, thank you for that. Actually, there were two topics, and I can combine them: governance and risk management. Relative to governance, as you can imagine, when you put an EPM system in place, there are a lot of governance pieces to it. Who owns what do they do, et cetera. So we actually prescribe an entire governance policy, if you will. We have a template for it, and then it gets customized. So just as a quick aside, this is not something that's left to run sort of asynchronous to a governance model. Specific to risk management. So risk is an interesting thing. There are a lot of different approaches to it. Sometimes risk is tossed in the corner with somebody who might be an auditor or whatever. That's not a very good model, right? The real model is to say, who owns the measures that are going to determine whether we have a risk? Or alternatively, oh, gee, we just got some very bad press and we now have to deal with it. It's an emergency. But by the way, how can we do that in a manner that is sustainable, meaning we fix the problem and then maybe fix it so it doesn't happen again? Again, looking at our processes and our outcome and process measures.
Yeah.
Therefore, just because we have little time today, what we do is we prescribe a methodology where we identify the risk measures, which are dynamic, and we actually identify them in the fundamentals and in the software so they can be managed very specifically. And if you have a risk register, it's about taking the high priority ones, factoring them into the software, identifying them, creating the reports so they're visible in real time, and then managing as such. So in other words, it's managing it in a plan, do, check cycle, no matter how disruptive and scary it might be. For example, bad press or somebody died and things like that. I mean, these are real. We have to move on. We have to move on them, but we can move in a sort of non-chaotic manner.
Good. I just realized, we haven't really spoken about our consultants. You alluded to them earlier, but maybe you could talk a little bit about their particular approach, just really briefly, their particular approach and style. How is it similar or different than other EPM consulting firms?
Yeah, great question. Thank you. Well, first of all, I am never afraid to explain what we do for a living. We're a SaaS company, and we sell a technology solution that fills a gap that was wide open until we built it. It's result software. Absolutely, that's the business we're in. But the reason why we're different is that we don't throw it across the transom and say, well, go for it. We actually have a value-added service that provides the support for the base product, of course, but also provides the support for, so how do I do fundamentals? How do I do strategy? And because we approach it that way and have the service intimate with the technology, it creates enormous stickiness to the technology because it's easy. It's easier to learn because you got help. It's also easy to learn. But there is an overarching piece that we just wouldn't ever want to forget. Our consultants are all experts in change management. And, if there's any OD discipline that has to be present in all of this, it's certainly change. And yet, with all due respect, a consultant who is only focused on the process, or maybe some people, but we're really processing technology, runs the risk that they'll do a great job and then it will fail later because they didn't have the change component. And we've proven that over the years. So if I had to identify, one very, very specific difference, it would be their OD experience, their awareness of the people equation and change.
Yeah, thanks.
Kelly, I did check the time, and I think we are down to 1 minute.
We are down to 1 minute, and I want to thank you, Aaron. It's always a pleasure, as I said, and I appreciate that last answer because it not only does it relate to the executive team, our interfaces with the executive team, but when we cascade down through the programs and the divisions, it goes all the way down to the manager and the frontline employee level. and
Yeah.
folks in between. So, all right. Well, this has been terrific. Thank you. Yes, and thank you to the participants for attending. We will be sending out the recording to you by the end of this week, if not sooner. And thank you very, very much for joining us. We appreciate your support. Have a good day. Bye-bye.